Great. Of course, I'm Harley Thompson. I'm the chair of this. Dan Lester, co-chair, who's identified himself. All right, Marc, the floor is yours. I've already sent out a bio. You might want to say a couple of sentences, and only a couple of sentences, about your own professional background. And if folks, unless they're speaking, if they could right now mute their phones. And it's all yours, Marc.
Okay, thank you. I'm Marc Cohen. I'm an architect. I worked for NASA for 26 years at Ames Research Center, including a year on the Space Station Concept Development Group at headquarters as a so-called commuting member. And after I took early retirement, I worked for Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems and also been there for 4.5 years till they laid off virtually the entire human spaceflight engineering team. And now I am starting my own business. The legal name is Marc M. Cohen Architects PC, professional corporation. Although I'm thinking of changing the name to Cohen Astrotecture, something like that, because it's a little more evocative. So the way that this particular thought came together is that Harley asked me to do a follow-up on a couple of presentations I delivered. One was at the 18th IAA Humans of Space Symposium, and the other was my testimony to the National Academy of Science NASA Technology Roadmap session, a workshop on April 27th. But Harley advised me that I hadn't gone far enough in my critique of some of the problems within NASA. So I did, towards the end, add a little bit of a further critique, but that's not really my intent. My intent is to try to address the question, is NASA ready for deep space, human space flight? So let's go to the next slide. I'm using the PDF slide numbers that appear at the top of the PDF window. So an overview of this presentation is the 5 showstoppers for Mars, which also applies to deep space. The first Mars habitat architecture, which is one of the IAA papers, but it's really more of an exemplar of some of the issues that we run into with the way NASA and the space community at large plans these kinds of missions. Then deep space habitation, asteroids, Mars, moons, which was my Academy of Science one. And then my contribution to international collaboration on analog utilization workshop, which I should say had a very strong international participation, including Russians, Europeans, at USRA a month ago, and I actually submitted a written paper for that, put together a few slides, and then just a closing argument about scientifically valid studies and a conclusion. So, first one is the 5 showstoppers for Mars, asteroids, deep space. So, the 5 showstoppers are hypogravity, radiation, the need for regenerative and bioregenerative life support, dust, which can be Mars dust and lunar dust and any place else you run into dust, and planetary protection. And kind of the context in which I started writing this back in, in September, was that people were still worrying that in the human research community, that NASA would someday just launch a crash program for a Mars mission without doing the essential research. That is to say, a lot of the arguments they make are that if NASA sends people to Mars without doing this research, they'll fail those reports correlated to the 5 showstoppers. So you see hypogravity countermeasures, radiation protection, life support. It turns out there is one that mentions Mars stuff, which is the Safe on Mars report, and Planetary Protection. So these are the things that we really need to deal with seriously. So funding for this critical human research, I'm on page 7, by the way. Funding for this critical human research has lagged so far behind NASA's ambition for Mars and asteroids as to render them unrealistic. Spacecraft and habitat architects and engineers need the research results to analyze, design, and build their systems. We are the customers. This is actually something that's often difficult to convey to the scientists, is that we're their customers and they need to convey their results in a form that we can understand and digest. And it's not sufficient to just refer us to a journal article with a citation that even the reference librarians at NASA libraries don't understand how to find it. You run into this like with the radiation research community, where they'll give you a citation that's RR 15-346, which tells you the name of the journal, research, radiation research, the volume, and a page number. I actually had this experience where I could not find a reference with the help of the Ames librarian. Anyway, so there's a tendency to jump to non-evidence-based conclusions in terms of architecture, design, engineering. And this is about what is not necessary and worse, what is not possible. And we get this both from the engineering side and we get the what is not necessary from the engineering side, and we get the what is not possible more from the science side, in terms of they'll tell us that certain things are not feasible. And, you know, sometimes having worked in human spaceflight for 3 decades, I feel like it poses the question of whether some of our programs are actually seeking solutions or even want them, as opposed to just some sort of status quo where they keep doing the same thing over and over again because it brings in funding but doesn't necessarily get results. So here's an example of an early Mars-based interplanetary vehicle concept by Vladimir Garin, who came to Ames from Russia. It's about the period of the 90-day study.
Did you mention the pages that you go along with page 9?
Oh, okay, page 8. It basically gives an example of a mission architecture or base architecture that shows all the showstoppers. Now, page 9, there are a lot of similarities with Mars and asteroid missions. This is an example of near-Earth metallic M-type asteroids. On this chart, the major axes are aligned coplanar, and the perihelia are all to the left, so this chart kind of allows you to compare the orbits without having to deal with the eccentricities. And
Mark, what page are you on?
page 9.
Thank you.
Page 9, sorry. So anyway, basically you can see that a lot of these near-Earth asteroids are also Mars crossers. So, you know, sending humans to an M-type asteroid is not necessarily a priority, but it's actually, we only know about 4 or 5 near-Earth M-types at this time, so it's kind of a small, manageable set. Page 10. So, for asteroid exploration, mitigation, and mining, there are lots of operational, human health, and performance issues, and people have been talking about asteroid mining for a long time. The analog cover on the left is from 1961, just about the anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's first space flight. So there have been a number have in the human research community is this rather absurd debate about large-scale artificial gravity environment versus the short-arm centrifuge. So this slide shows the larger artificial gravity environment. On slide 13, it shows examples of the short-arm centrifuge, including a design on the lower right for incorporating a so-called short-arm centrifuge into the lower level of the transhab, and you can see the Planet logo there in the lower left-hand corner of that sketch. So here's the problem with artificial gravity countermeasures. We still do not have the 2.5-meter space station life science centrifuge to perform the necessary fundamental science, but we are at ISS complete. And NASA spent probably about $1.5 billion over 20 years developing this centrifuge for the centrifuge accommodation module. The Japanese spent probably close to $500 million, but they only admit to spending about $100 million. And this is the great tragedy of ISS, which is that the most important payload to put on ISS to do the fundamental research in artificial gravity, in gravity countermeasures, was sabotaged from ever getting on there by, kind of the combined efforts of the people who didn't want it on the ISS for various reasons. They didn't want rats, they didn't want vibration, they didn't want the distraction or the power draw or whatever. So there's a case where the most important thing we could have done with ISS we're not going to do because of the deep hostility within the operations community towards supporting this kind of research activity. Okay, radiation protection on page 15. So radiation protection guidelines have become much more strict over the years, and you can see this chart, how they've increased from the period of about 1965 to the most recent standards in 2000, although I don't have it in here, but the NASA HSIR goes a little more strict and on some things. But you can see under career limit in the right-hand column that in 1970 we were looking at a career limit of 4 sievert, and now we're down to 0.6 gray equivalent for a 35-year-old female and 1 gray equivalent for a 35-year-old male. So radiation protection, can we find a solution? Here's the problem. We have not yet designed and seriously tested a system with sufficient shielding for GCRs. And the assumption in the engineering community is that shielding mass is always parasitic, and it's not a solution. In fact, Frank Cucinotta, who's presenting in a week or two, actually published an article along with Marco Durante, who's in the picture in the upper right, he's the guy on the right, asserting that shielding will never provide a solution for more than 1/3 of the total GCR component because the mass is too great for a spacecraft. And I think that's an assumption of what's not possible that we really need to re-examine. So the solution that we've looked at is multifunctional wall construction. And this is what we recommended when I was on the NRC committee managing radiation risk in the new era of space exploration. So I'm on page 17. Back in 1997, we had a project to design an interplanetary vehicle habitat to support the Mars missions, such as the newly minted, actually it was before it came out, the Mars Design Reference Mission, and there the solution was a 30-centimeter water shield. That's the blue enclosure around the habitat, and that came to 42 tons of water, and a water in. And once we get the sufficient supply of water in space, we just keep reusing it, pumping it into the from one returning IPV into the next IPV that's going out beyond Earth orbit. And here's page 19 is a diagram of the Sun, Earth, and Earth-Moon Lagrange points, just in case anybody doesn't know where they are. Okay, regenerative life and bioregenerative life support. These are all components or functions of these systems. The two systems would provide complementary capabilities with unlike redundancy. Page 21, example of physical-chemical regenerative life support. Page 22, cells, bioregenerative life support. Page 23, Mars global dust environment. Okay, so we know that dust is a problem on Mars. We know that dust is a problem on the Moon. Page 24 shows an example from the dust accumulation on the Spirit, on Mir, Mars exploration rover. We know that there's studies that show toxicity above lunar and Mars dust. Page 25. The one thing that NASA has written as a policy about this appears in the Human Systems Integration Requirements, NASA CX 70024, where basically it says that the limit of lunar dust in the internal atmosphere shall be verified by analysis. Now, the problem with that is that you need to do it by testing, and in the HSI auditors, you can establish that your proofs by analysis, by testing, or by demonstration, basically, and it's inadequate to say that you're going to do it by analysis. And in fact, in the 2010 crew productivity study at Northrop Grumman, we recommended standards for dust removal and dust disposal. And that paper is something that I actually have online at the spacearchitect.org website. So Mars dust mitigation and control on page 26. We need to look at dust exclusion, dust separation, and dust removal and dust disposal. And one of the few configurations that were designed that has the potential to address this is the suit port, although I'm not even so sure that will really work over the long term. Okay, page 27, planetary protection. Planetary protection follows logically after dust. You've got to realize that the biggest showstopper to human exploration would be to find exit life on Mars or somewhere else where we were going. And the problem is, the challenge is that everything leaks. We can't design anything that does not leak. We need to come up with another solution for how we're going to handle the consequences of the leaks. The ecosystem must integrate planetary protection and contaminant control. And so must the surface science equipment. Page 28. So there's been some work with rovers that are designed for contamination control and astrobiology sample handling. There's a whole story here, but the most recent embodiment is the small electric rover, the linear electric rover for that has been used in DRAX. Okay, so that 89, we had the 90-day study, which suggested using an ISS-type module for the habitat on the moon. And we also had the larger Lacus constructible habitat that was designed by the Eagle engineering guys, Gary Kitmacher and John Sikora, page 33. Page 34, in 1993, we're preparing for the Mars Design Reference Mission, and we got this concept from Kent Houston, which I believe was rendered by John Frassanito. And it features the dual habitats, each with its own airlock, and there's basically a lot of redundancy within the system. And positioning. One of these would be launched in on a pre-positioning flight 26 months before the first crew flight. So, slide 35, in 1994 or so, the so-called Mars Underground got together and published the book Strategies for Mars, which addressed assumptions and constraints. In 1995, on page 36, the book Strategies for Mars came out, and this is this rendering, this pencil drawing by Carter Emart shows the interpretation we made of Kent Houston's concept, where we have the dual habitats, but also dual greenhouses, dual ISRU plants. The airlocks are pulled out to the side as EVA access modules to which the rovers can dock, and the crew members don't have to go down into the airlock, right below the floor of the habitat. And those structures in front of the habitats are external sample storage for scientific samples. Okay, 37. So at that time we had a big debate about the design of whether there should be common habitats, whether the habitat should be common, that is, between the interplanetary vehicle and the lander, or the landed habitat, versus habitats that are optimized for each section. And I won't go through all this, but these are the issues we described to argue. And the one thing that has fallen out through recent research is that we now have evidence that Mars partial gravity does not provide any countermeasure at all against bone demineralization. That's where the big circle with the strike through is. So it went on page 38 when the MDRM was published in 1997. Jeff Hoffman and Dave Kaplan acknowledged the so-called minority report. Study team members were not unanimous in the choice of a common habitat for space transit, for landing on the surface, and for surface habitation. Some argue that due to the different requirements, a common design was not in the best interest of the mission. This is an area for further research, and there's a lot more we could say about that. But anyway, let's move on. 39. So in 1997, Chris Kennedy and I put together the NASA Habitat and Surface Construction Roadmap, and this is just one-page abstract. In the left column, you see the classes. There were 3 classes: pre-integrated, prefabricated, and in-situ resource construction. And I'll come back to this later. This was an attempt to systematize the typology and taxonomy of planetary and lunar construction types. So, slide 40, in 1998, the MDRM 3.0 came out, and it represented a retreat from the baseline. And my impression was that the scale of the first MDRM really frightened people in Washington as to the scale and ambition of it. And so what happened was it was scaled back to one pre-integrated cab with an inflatable attachment and no pre-positioning launch. So this is what you see is what you get. You get the lander, crew land in the same habitat they fly out in, and then there's some separate habitat to fly back in. So we gave up the redundancy. We gave up the assurances and safety of pre-positioning. Another rendering by John Frassanito. after we completed the first phase, the center management failed on it, and that's one of the things that happens is that we have a lot of projects that are successful, but because they cross turf lines, bureaucratic turf lines, they get killed by the people who think you're infringing on their turf, and it's without regard to whether the work is good or not. In fact, you can still find people who will tell you with absolute certainty that a short-arm centrifuge, such as the one human paracentrifuge here, will never work. In fact, a flight surgeon said that to me about 2 months ago. And I think it's really a problem when the territoriality skews the reality. Okay, so more analogs. On page 42, we have the Lunar Mars Life Support Test Project at JSC. Very successful series of 3 closed chamber tests, although it would have been really great if we had more scientifically valid published research on the architectural and psychological and social science aspects of this experiment. Again, page 43, the Russian Mars 105 and Mars 500 experiments at the IVMT in Moscow. They do have a team of international scientists looking at all the social and psychological aspects of this experiment, although I don't know if they're going to do any sort of architectural post-occupancy evaluation. Page 44, we have the field analogs. This one shows the F-Mars analog, courtesy of Brian Shiro, the astronautforhire.com. And these field experience experiments can be valuable in a sort of in a practical sense, but there's been absolutely no useful research that has come out of them in terms of crew factors, human factors, architectural design research, or anything else like that. 1998, page 45, we have the TransHab, which is intended for interplanetary vehicle habitat. And the 2 principals there were Chris Kennedy and Constance Adams. Page 46, in 1999, the Center for Mars Exploration at Ames, and then later the work was taken over by the Young Astrobiology activity at Ames. We started looking at Mars Surface Science Laboratory, what would be the work process within a Mars Surface Science lab. Page 47, another set of concepts are early mobile-based concepts. And lower left, you see another Frasinito rendering. Page 48 is the Habot and mobile-based concept. Habot and related mobile-based concepts. This was an initiative sponsored by John Menkins and funded me to do several phases of study on this. And on the lower line, you see several efforts by Scott Howe and JPL to expand on the mobile-based concept. And so on page 49, here you see a rendering of the habitat concept as it was part of the HAPOD. It was pretty basic, but it included provisions for substantial radiation shielding. And it's a modular concept where you can cluster or dock these things together. And in one of the studies, we looked at HABOTs with multiple docking ports. So page 50, the Mars Design Reference Mission 5.0 came out in 2009. The earliest thing I can find that relates to it is this model at the University of Houston, Susquehanna International Center for Space Architecture, and then on the left you see a rendering of the base concept where you basically have a pre-integrated hard cylinder on the lower part, or I actually can't tell if that's a cylinder. It certainly is in the University of Houston version. And then there's an inflatable on the top. And this is something that NASA did with their space grant summer project, or actually they were bid last summer, but I guess the schools are working on them now, aren't you, Dave? At Maryland, for example?
Yeah, Maryland, Oklahoma State, and Wisconsin.
Right, yeah, okay, so this is kind of a precursor, or this is kind of what leads up to that grant. Then on page 51, I'm showing the Desert Racks, which is, field tests, practical field testing, and tire kicking of various concepts. And, they are linked to concepts for the actual lunar base or Mars base. You see the central unit on the lower left is the so-called habitat demonstration unit, which is similar to the toroidal sort of unit you see in the upper right. So there is some linkage, but again, the problem we have is that there's almost nothing that's published from any of this that could be considered scientifically valid or reproducible or testable results. So, page 52, the synthesis and conclusion from the first two, that's the 5 showstoppers and the Mars habitats, is that given sufficient science results, it is possible to design and engineer to find evidence-based solutions for the 5 showstoppers. But it's essential to design space vehicles and habitats from the beginning to mitigate the showstoppers. Now, gravity is the sole constant in the evolution of life. It's not just a good idea, it's a law for human health and reproduction. We're never going to get away from the need to provide gravity for long-duration missions. Radiation protection must be built into the spacecraft and habitat design process from the beginning. It's not going to work to think of it as some sort of afterthought where you add a few centimeters of polyethylene and call it a day. Life support and environmental control systems plus data systems and autonomy comprise the central integration disciplines for human spacecraft and habitat design. And right now it's extremely difficult to achieve these kinds of integrations because of the stovepiping you have, not just within NASA centers, but it's actually more acute in the aerospace industry. When I worked on the CQV proposal for Boeing and Northrop Grumman, the failed proposal, what I found one of the endemic problems was that people in different engineering disciplines really didn't talk to each other, and they could not even understand why somebody from a different stovepipe would even want to talk to them. And finally, we need to use the ecosystem to make Mars dust control, Mars lunar dust control, and planetary protection possible. There has to be a bridging across these threats and this discipline. Okay, so we're on page 53.
Actually, Mark, could you go back to page 52? As long as you're talking about synthesis and conclusion, I'm trying to sort of wrap this all together. You spent a bunch of time talking about the 5 showstoppers, which is really important, and then you did a sort of an exhaustive survey of the different mission architectures that have been proposed over the years. But isn't the conclusion that none of those architectures actually mitigated those 5 showstoppers?
Well, not very much. None of them are really based on scientific research. I mean, first of all of them assume that when you after your 6 months or so in deep space, you get to Mars and you're in 0.38 gravity, and all of a sudden, all the human metabolic and physiological systems go back to normal. But in fact, the most recent evidence shows that 0.38 G is not a countermeasure for anything. So we have to look at providing gravity countermeasures on the surface of Mars, whether it's a short-arm centrifuge or a large radius habitat. And we aren't anywhere close in terms of life environmental control systems for the regenerative systems that we need. Radiation protection, none of those things took it seriously, with the exception of the 1995 strategies for Mars habitat, and you'll even find people who recite the mantra that we only need to worry about SPEs on Mars, which is not true, because if you're going to be there for 600 days on the surface, you are concerned vitally about GCRs. And the radiobiological damage effects of GCRs are approximately 30 times greater than equivalent energy and LET of SPEs.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at here is sort of a high-level view. That is, we have a huge number of different architectures over the many years. I'm trying to understand what have we learned by doing those that relates to the showstoppers. We still have 5 showstoppers that these architectures don't address. Is it fair to say that 20 years ago we had 10 showstoppers and now we only have 5? I mean, have we made progress?
Well, that's a completely different question. I'll have to think about that a little. And certainly there are things that we've, made advances with robotics and with, some of the engineering safety things and the implementation of reliability measures. Our ability to quantify risk and mitigate it based on that calculation is much greater than it was 20 or 30 years ago. That's certain.
One of the things that you pointed out, I think, in an earlier slide, is that the original assumption that Martian gravity is adequate to overcome some of the problems of hypergravity was false. That in fact, special provisions up to date, Mars, the gravity does not help much. Is that right? That's one.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Have we finished with page 52?
Yeah. No, I don't want to keep going on that. That was nice. Thanks.
Can I make any comments on it? May I weigh in on it?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Andrew Thomas at JSC. These 5 showstoppers present different degrees of problem. Some are more serious than others. There is emerging evidence, for example, about the low gravity that we've, through recent crews coming back from space station, resistive exercise mitigates extremely effectively the problems of muscle loss and bone loss of low gravity. I think it is very much still an open question as whether you would need artificial gravity for a deep space mission. I don't think that's a foregone conclusion at all, particularly based on what's recently been found. The only aspect of low gravity that has emerged recently that's new, which is not yet properly understood, is an observed rise in intracranial pressure in some crew members. The causes and consequences are not properly understood, and how to mitigate it's not understood. But I would say it's probably not right to say that we must have artificial gravity. It does pose a lot of problems for neurovestibular, short-arm centrifuges, and I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that it's necessary. The radiation protection is a huge problem, much underestimated. The numbers you quoted for protection for GCR would probably provide very little protection for GCR. The recommended allowable doses are coming down. As a consequence, allowable flight durations are coming down substantially. Gender and age benefits that were once thought to be present are no longer the case. The playing field's level. Most people would not be able to do one of these deep space missions as we envisage them.
Andy, this is Harley. Quick question about that last comment.
Mm-hmm.
Is the gender and age difference, because being a middle-aged male, I was really hoping that I would have some advantage here. Is it the reason that the playing field has become level is because the allowable dosage has now gotten so low?
No, they're seeing less and less variance.
Okay, thanks.
matter is, even you quoted 70 tons of water, that would provide really inadequate protection for GCR2. You would need quite a lot more than, I think,
well,
there is 70 centimeters, and that would not be enough.
Well, there are, calculations on how much you would reduce the exposure over what period of time, and that's what it's based on.
Yeah, the exposure that has for 1 foot of water is a factor between about 1.5 and 2, and that's really not enough. And you need tens of feet of water in order to be effective, and that's a big problem. And of course, it's one thing to say you just put enough water in, but we don't have propulsion systems that would enable us to move that mass of water around in deep space, and this is the problem. You build a massive shielding, and we can't push it around. So I think the shielding problem is a really big one. It's out there.
Okay.
An Eclipse system.
I have 20 more slides. Can we?
Yeah, I just would like to comment that the life support in Eclipse system, as you have observed, is also a big problem. We do not have engineering solutions for high reliability, low maintenance, low mass life support systems.
And let's do this. This is Harley. I'll play moderator.
Yeah, I'm done, Harley.
Exactly. Thanks, Andy. And then Mark needs to take over again. Once again, as many of you know, we've got this line 24/7. And if Mark and whomever else, when he finishes, wants to stay on after the nominal top of the hour, you've got the line free to do it. So in any case, why don't you continue, Mark?
I can stay on as long as anybody wants to talk.
Okay.
So
pick it up.
Page 53. So deep space habitation, asteroids, Mars, moons. This was for the NASA Technology Workshop at the National Academy. So I gave an overview of the advanced habitat. I commented on the committee process. Okay, and then on page 56, I talk about looking back on the 1997 Habitats and Surface Construction Roadmap, which, at the time, it was a step forward, but it had its limitations. And those limitations, I think, are instructive today. I believe we can go a lot further to improve on what we did in 97, but the limitations, I think we can now recognize are, one, it was descriptive based on material specifications. It really started from point design approaches to habitat bases, and meaning that designers promoted one concept or technology and try to make the mission requirements fit the concept or fit the technology. It was not evidence-based or supported by empirical research. It assumed a kind of a linear evolutionary path based on prescriptive design. And the designs to work into this approach really had to be configuration specific to a particular mission. And it did not really consider mission duration as a key design driver and driver for pressurized volume. So on page 57, since 97, the space architecture community has developed a much more sophisticated and better documented understanding. We have an AIAA technical committee on space architecture, and we've started publishing seriously. We have a book called Out of This World, the New Field of Space Architecture, which starts to lay the foundation of a discipline within the Kuhn paradigm. Okay, so let's go to page 58. I reviewed the 5 showstoppers, page 59. I talk about performance-based requirements based on research. This is where we really need to go. If we're talking about an advanced habitat, we really need to be talking about figures of merit and meeting rigorous performance-based standards and requirements, not merely making material specification kinds of descriptions. And I believe that these standards and requirements can be developed and refined only through So advanced habitats for deep space must incorporate evidence-based crew health and safety protections and crew productivity objectives from the beginning, and they can't be treated as an afterthought to minimum functionality. That is to say, okay, we don't need any of that stuff to get where we're going. We'll have that we'll buy that stuff in as somebody can justify it. I don't think that's going to really be a successful strategy. Although, again, minimum functionality is an excellent method of analysis for understanding the engineering requirements for the basic vehicle. Okay, now the failure of space habitat analog studies on page 61. I alluded to this before. These studies have been either non-existent or a failure because there's not been any statistically valid experimental research design, only anecdotes. The typical scenario is that one individual does something in the habitat or vehicle prototype and then declares that with the n equals 1, he has proven the hypothesis. And how many things can you get wrong with this approach or scenario? And so I would argue that NASA and the international partners need a new approach to analog studies that produces scientifically valid, evidence-based, reproducible results with sufficient statistical power, that is a large enough n. And surprisingly, I can find people who will argue that we don't need to do any of that. We just want to go there and see how well it works. Now, post-occupancy evaluation is a major capability for understanding how successful what you've done is in terms of design of an environment. And we had an excellent set of post-occupancy evaluation studies in the Skylab Experience Bulletins. But this has become kind of my pet rant. Despite all of NASA's protestations about improving transparency, in fact, NASA's been taking a lot of stuff down off of the scientific and technical report servers, including all the Skylab Experience Bulletins that previously were completely available to the public. And I think that this is a very dangerous trend that some nameless, faceless person, probably a contractor somewhere, is arbitrarily just removing stuff from the libraries and removing it from the servers, and it might disappear forever. And this is a very serious problem that the people, that the transparency police who I've talked to seem completely unwilling to even understand. Okay, page 63. So the conclusion from that stuff is basically what I just said. I won't repeat it. Page 64 is called Using Space Habitat Analogs for Architectural Design Research, and this was based on my written submission to the International Analogs Workshop at USRA. So page 65, the need for scientifically valid research for space habitats. And what we basically have to understand is how well an environment performs, how it is impossible to improve or remediate it, how to design a better one the next time, and do that on the basis of scientifically valid data. And page 66. Now, there are limits to traditional human factors research when you talk about environmental design, and I state this as having been a member of the Human Factors Division AIMS for about 15 years. There's two major shortcomings in the traditional human factors approach. One, a lot of them absolutely refuse to recognize that a human-environment interface exists. And two, the human factors problem is a short-duration issue. That is, the human factors problem occurs only in the last few seconds before the airplane crashes. So there are a number of disciplines that you need to look at. I only go through a little bit of it here. Actually, I have a lot more material and many stories. But environmental psychology is one of them. So page 67. Page 68, anthropology and cultural ethnography is very important. And it anthropology and ethnography, and it wasn't anything of the kind. Page 69, space syntax is a discipline of modeling perceived spaciousness and the richness and complexity of an environment. It's a whole field of its own. On the lower, this is page 69, on the lower right you see a space syntax depth mapping analysis of the Tate Gallery at London. You can see the analogy to, for example, the Mir space station on the left. That there's ways of understanding and modeling the quality of the environment, and then testing these things empirically. Page 70. The key to scientifically valid habitat and analog studies is to ask big questions. And one of the problems we have is that engineering disciplines, particularly system engineering, doesn't like to ask questions, or don't like to ask. They're uncomfortable asking questions where the question will not yield a simple deterministic answer. And I have a whole other spiel about the system engineering religion as practiced within NASA. And the basis of my argument is that what has happened with system engineering in NASA is almost totally unrelated to what the discipline of system engineering started out to be. Instead, it's become a ritualistic codification of the bureaucracy. So, my last slide, slide 72. Is NASA ready for deep space human spaceflight? No. Almost no one in NASA, Congress, or the White House is acting or talking as if they're serious about humans in deep space. We're not investing nearly enough in the science for the 5 showstoppers. We're not asking the key questions, the big questions for hardware and mission design on operations. There are far too many people within the agency and industry fighting against the proposed crewed asteroid missions in favor of a return to the moon. And we've seen how we saw with the sabotage of the life science centrifuge accommodation module for ISS that this type of resistance can, effectively eliminate a major payload or a mission. And the subtext that drives every project is the control of decision-making and funding. Nobody cares, least of all at this time Congress, whether a project will produce a viable spacecraft. So I would say to answer the title question, no. We're not ready. We're not close to being ready. And there are very few people who are really seriously, that I'm aware of, are really seriously coming to grips with the issues. So, my time is up.
Wow, you made it, Mark. Almost. You made it. Thank you. Okay, folks. So again, Mark said that he'd be willing to stay on. I've got a few questions. I'm only the moderator. The folks have some questions that they'd like to pose to Mark.
Mark Tom Sullivan here. You made the assertion a couple of times that there is now evidence that 1/3 G is not protective. And I tend to think you're correct, but I'm not aware of the evidence. Could you enlighten me?
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah, so there's been a series of studies conducted at the Harvard-MIT component of NSBRI, where they've been doing nasty things to mice and rats. And basically what they have done is they've come up with a method of suspending a mouse by a harness around its shoulders, so that they simulate 0.2G and 0.4G, and they use these as set points for lunar and Mars gravity respectively. And what they have found is with the 0.4G mice, no countermeasure effects at all, just like in the 0.2G group. And they had an excellent poster at the IAA Humans in Space Symposium. I've actually been aware of this project for a couple of years. I visited the lab there about a year and a half ago at Israel Deaconess Hospital in Boston. And anyway, I expect we'll be seeing them hitting the
any comment about the benefit or the possible effect of exercise in mitigating some of those issues?
Well, yes, exercise works to some extent. It works to varying degrees with varying people. And part of the problem is that people are highly individual in their reactions to different changes in environment. And, some people lose bone at the rate of, 1/3% to 0.5% a month. Others lose bone at the rate of 1 to 2% a month.
But not resistive exercise, they don't.
Well, but you see, you don't lose. Resistive exercise doesn't help you uniformly throughout your body. It'll help some parts of it, but for example, it's very difficult to load your spine equally as if you were just standing in 1G. It doesn't do you any good for your skull. It doesn't necessarily load your fingers or your toes the same way. And while there are some effects, while there are some beneficial effects, and certain bones, you can almost stop the bone loss. In fact, it's not a uniform effect. You still lose. You can't load your head resistably.
Well, I hate to. I've never heard any crews coming back complaining or having problems with bone loss in their skulls. The areas.
Well, yeah, but they don't complain about anything.
Well, that's entirely.
They don't complain. I mean, that's part of the astronaut selection. They pick people who don't complain.
Well, I think on these issues, I wouldn't use the word complain. Then I'd say report. I just have to reiterate what I said previously. I think resistive exercise is showing itself to be a powerful way to mitigate bone loss and muscle loss in crews. That doesn't mean that we haven't solved the low gravity problem. That certainly means that it's very debatable as whether an artificial gravity is needed.
Yeah, okay. I accept that. There's the third position, which is that there are drug solutions as well.
Right.
And I would like nothing better than if we did have some sort of magic solution of combination of drugs and resistive exercise or some other kind of exercise. I just don't see that being effective for 3 years. Because even with resistive exercise, you're not totally eliminating bone loss. You're reducing it. And
the numbers are looking very good. Unfortunately, they haven't been published yet, so there's nothing. The wider community is not aware of it, but that's one of the things that ISS is giving us some really good indications, and it all comes from the ARED machine that's up there, which, of course, the Mir flyers didn't have any resistive exercise, and they had bone loss, but these ISS crews with this ARED, advanced resistive exercise device, are doing very well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I look forward to seeing that published. I mean, I hope you're right.
This is Harley. A partial answer to many of the challenges that your 5 showstoppers present is a significantly reduced trip travel time, which of course means, as study after study has shown, nuclear thermal propulsion. That is a huge technological challenge and a political hot potato that, in my view, so long as somebody is not going to grab onto and solve, is going to be the ultimate showstopper for keeping us from going to Mars. Do you have a comment, Mark?
Well, I probably have several, but the first would be, where can you write the environmental impact statement to test a nuclear thermal engine on the Earth? I mean, we can't do it. In the 60s they did the NERVA program. They tested it in the Utah desert, but I don't think that you could even pay Kazakhstan or Russia or anywhere anymore to test such an engine. So you'd have to do it in space. And then you have the question is, can you really do a serious engine test in orbit or in zero gravity? Or do you have to have it in a static test stand? Does that mean putting it on the moon? And then where on the moon are you going to put it? You're going to put it in a deep crater somewhere? I don't know. I mean, I think it might be possible to do that, but we would have to find an acceptable workaround for the political obstacles and the environmental objections. I think that there may be some hope in the fields of ion engines and Hall effect engines with more work. I mean, right now you're looking at slow spiraling out to L1 or out to Mars or whatever. But I think that with much higher power densities and other improvements, it might be possible to improve the performance of those engines significantly, although I'm certainly not a propulsion expert.
One of the completely different subject, one of the most disturbing comments that you made, which I saw in the original set of charts from a couple of weeks ago when we first started talking about this, is the apparent removal of Skylab data. Now, I have to ask a trivia question. You're sure about this? It's been removed from?
Yes. It's not on NASA, and a lot of other things have been also. But I can tell you that I think in 2007 I downloaded a number of the 20-some Skylab experience bulletins from the server, and then I went back a few months ago, and they were gone. I went and I talked with the librarians at Ames, and they confirmed that it wasn't there. And you can still get them if you can, twist the arm of a NASA librarian. I got them to find an old server, still existed somewhere, and they downloaded them for me. But they didn't even have all of them. They only had the first 15. There were about 6 that were missing from even that server. Fortunately, when I sent the Space Human Factors archive to the Federal Records Center on their way to the National Archives, I had sent a set of the bulletins. They will retrieve them from the Federal Records Center and make Xerox copies. And actually, I'm planning to go into Ames tomorrow early and with a duplex scanner that I bought and start scanning the remaining 6 Skylab experience bulletins to preserve them, because the library threw out its hard copies. NASA's shutting down its libraries, and this is a very serious situation where nameless, faceless contractors or subcontractors within the bureaucracy can just decide to throw out large swaths of very important material, and nobody in NASA management seems to care. But I think it's a very serious problem. The idea that we could lose critical data simply because of somebody got a contract to make the data storage more efficient or something. I don't know exactly what the cause is. I've actually heard several other theories. I don't know if any of them are true. One theory I heard is that as a result, right at the end of the Bush administration, they put into effect some regulations to reduce the amount of data that was available or anything that might be suspect. It shouldn't be released. The other thing I heard, which I think is the most cynical of all, is that because of the fact that we've never done a post-occupancy evaluation on shuttle or ISS so far, that having the Skylab literature available makes shuttle and station look bad, so they got rid of it for that reason. I don't know if any of this is true, but I think it's very problematic when the NASA libraries and the NASA